Who has their notebooks? Raise your notebook in the air if you have it. Chris here. Who else? Okay, that's a pretty good turnout. I'll wear the blue sweater next week. That's your reward. All right, so today we have the science behind sailing. Each week I'm going to try and put together a different topic for you. I wanted to start the first one out as pretty broad because a lot of our older team members have heard all this before, so we got to keep teaching them stuff. And then we have you new guys who are still learning the points of sail. So what I ask of you new people tonight is just try and keep up, write down everything you can, and just try and relate it back in the spring. So that's why writing down right now is really important, because you're not going to remember this stuff if you don't write it down. I'll do my best to mention, oh, you should write this specifically down so you can look at it later. So here's the goals for now. Learn the points of sail. Easy. There's a couple of them. You'll see a diagram. Learn the magic behind sailing upwind. There's some magic behind it. Humans didn't really discover that until a couple hundred years ago. And when you think of thousands of years of people sailing the oceans, all you could do is go downwind. If the wind wasn't going the way you wanted to go, you couldn't go that way. Which is kind of it doesn't work. All right, the next thing you really need to know, especially for college sailing, is dirty air. Where is it? How do you avoid it? And lastly, why a flat boat is a happy boat. It's a good rhyme. All right, points of sail. Can you guys read this?
No, but it goes all the way down.
It goes all the way down.
What? All right, newbies, use this. This is what you need to write down. Draw a couple boats, and basically, when we're sailing upwind, so let's say we start a race. You start a race like this. Wind's coming from here. Here's the starting line. We sail upwind on a close-hauled course, zigzagging. Now, the closest you can really sail to the wind is about 40 degrees, and it varies by boats. Now, the first way to start out is, when you think of the points of sail, is in irons. When you're in irons or in the no-go zone of this range, if the wind's coming from here, there's a range of 80 degrees where if you sail in that direction, your sail will turn into a flag. It'll just flap. You can't get flow over it. So if you're in irons, you're not going anywhere. The next one is close-hauled, which is the closest you can sail to the wind. Then 90 degrees to the wind is a beam reach, broad reach, and running. Now, in 420s, when we're running, we sail downwind and we go wing on wing. Hopefully you all know what wing on wing is by now. Now, in light air, you could write down that in light air, it's slow to go dead downwind or running. If you're running with the wind and there's only 2-mile-per-hour winds, you're only going to go 1.8. You can't go any faster. But if you slowly turn this way and you start sailing in this direction, now you can go 2.5 and 3. And that's because you generate lift. And that's what we're going to talk about next. All right, can you turn the projector off? Now, for you more advanced people, we're going to talk about lift, and we're going to start off with an airplane wing. Okay, so if you ever looked out the window on an airplane, you probably just saw two big flappy wings. Okay, you didn't think there's any definition to them. There's actually a lot flappy wings. There's actually, it wouldn't work if you just stuck a board out and had it on an angle. It's a lot about this curvature and the profile of it. And that's because when wind goes around an object like this, there is a speed gradient between this wind right here, air, and the wind on top. Now, let's look at this right here. if I just had a rectangle. Now, without getting too heavy into science, this wind and this wind right here has to get to the other side, and they have to meet up at the exact same time. And if they don't, the universe explodes. So when you apply that to a wing principle, this wind on top has to go farther. So to go farther in the same amount of time than this bottom line, it has to go faster. And when air travels faster, it also, there's this, this is going to get sciencey.
Unnecessary.
Yep, very unnecessary. Okay, this is energy for you math people in air, okay? There's a pressure part and a speed part. If you go faster, the pressure has to go down. So if this side's going faster, the pressure went down. So now there's higher pressure on the bottom, so it lifts upwards. Okay? Lower pressure on top means higher pressure on bottom, does that. So now we apply this to a sail. This is about sailing upwind. Here's where the magic happens. Wind goes there, wind goes there. Low pressure on one side, low pressure on this side. So now you get this arrow, and that's lift. Okay? Now here's your issue. If you didn't have a centerboard, you would just go sideways. So what you learn when you start to think of it like this, when there's lift generated that way, the most important sail on any boat is the centerboard. And that's because without it, you're just going to go sideways. So now we can picture this underwater. Let's go from there to right here. I'm going to scale the boat up. Here's the centerboard. Here's the rudder. Now, things to write down at this point is, we're going to move into the next thing, and that's the stuff you want to write down. This stuff, you're not going to write a science thesis. I'm not too worried, but it's nice to hear about it to see how this can all relate back. So now, your centerboard generates a force in this direction, and your rudder also helps with that. So does your hull. All these things keep the boat from going sideways. Now, what you'll hear with me, if we're ever sailing together, is flat boat every single second. Okay, because the second you start heeling over, this big arrow right here goes from big to that. And even worse, this arrow right here goes to that. It goes like, you can heel over 3-4 degrees, and instantly you lose all that force you're generating sideways, and now you're sliding sideways. And you won't notice it right away, because it's on the order of like 0.1 miles an hour sliding sideways. But it really adds up when you're sailing up a course, and if you're at nationals, every single other boat is going to be flat. And every boat that's flat is going to end up higher to the mark than you. And you'll start out sailing like this, they'll keep going, and you'll end up, after 4 minutes, you'll end up 5 boat lengths leeward of them. And if you ever notice when you're on the water and you're like, why aren't I doing well right now? Chances are your boat's not flat. That's literally the biggest thing that I notice myself doing. Now, I say boat's not flat because your rudder and centerboard lose efficiency. The other really big thing is the second you start to heel over, if here's your mast and you're looking at the back end of the boat, here's a curved leech of the sail. So I'm going to exaggerate this for purpose, but let's say this is perpendicular to the ground, 10 miles an hour this way. Now, if I do 10 miles an hour of wind hitting a sail like that, now it actually feels like 8 in that direction. So if you start to heel over like that, your sail is now effectively feeling less wind. So it's like sailing in a lull. It's not going to win races. All right. Now later, one of the next chalk talks we're going to do is on sail trim. Right now I'll tell you why sail trim is really important, and more science behind how sails work. So if you have a boat like this, here's the jib on a 420. It's curved like that. Okay, the jib, and you can write this down, is estimated to be 25% of the whole lift generated in a sailboat. Now get rid of that. Let's say you're just sailing with a main. That is about 35. Now a cool science thing that happens is when you put a jib and a main that are perfectly trimmed together, you get 100. I mean, this doesn't add up close to 100 at all. Because what happens is when you put them together, the wind from the jib blows into the main, which charges it up more, and together they turn into one giant foil. And that's if it's all trimmed together. See, that can start to look, shaded in. It's one big sail. Now, if you screw up jib trim, it turns into, let's say you don't have your jib trimmed in enough. Now, instead of the wind flowing from the back edge of the jib, it flows outwards. And now the main's not getting the drive that it would have. So crews, that's why if you're ever like wondering, is my jib trimmed correctly? What you should really look at is the trailing edge of it. This is a good thing to write down. The trailing edge of your jib, if you were to like stick your head, like if you're looking up, this is what I do when I'm on a big boat trying to look if the sail's trimmed correctly. The jib, if you had magic streamers right there, should flow directly into about a third of the way back in the main. So if your jib's out like right here, you could kind of imagine where it's going. That's not to it. And even worse is over trimmed. If it's like this, if you over trim your jib, it creates a bubble right here and screws all the flow in the main up. So you're not even going to come close to your main giving 35%. It'll be more like 15 and your jib, it just drags you all side with it. Over trimmed is worse than under trimmed. So things to take away so far. Flat boat is a happy boat because if second you heel, your centerboard stops working and your sails stop working. The next thing you should take away is an over-trimmed sail is worse than an under-trimmed sail because it screws up the flow over everything. And the next big thing is the jib and the main must work perfectly together all the time. Okay. All right, next thing we're going to talk about, in a 420, and I want Kirsten to try and talk about this. Windward sheeting. You love it. I don't. But you know what you're doing. So what are some ways that you know how much windward sheet to put on?
I trim it into proper trim. So, and then let off an inch to an inch and a half, depending on wind speed. And then trim on the other, that inch and a half. We'll just take the slack out basically of the other one.
Okay.
And depending on like how heavy I would tighten it up. To like if it was heavy wind, trimmed in all the way, let out about an inch, and then trim on that inch back on the windward sheet. Got ya.
So cruise, kind of confusing right now. She's gonna have a full chalk talk on crewing, and the things you want to write down are her steps. Like what she's saying is, in science kind of terms, like she's trimming the sail in really tight right here, and then she is pulling that line on there, and then she eases it out. She eases this line that keeps it really tight there, so it creates a curve. She creates a curve to match the flow with the main. That's what your goal is. Now, next thing we're going to talk about is dirty air. And it's actually our last thing, and then we're going to go to the quiz. Yeah. And if Connor doesn't get 100%, I'm not wearing the sweater. All right. Okay, so far we talked about the flow over sails. We talked about the flow over wings. And we talked about the interaction between the main and the jib. Now, all those can relate back to how they're taking energy out of the wind. Now, if you take energy out of the wind where the sailboat is, that means it's going to leave behind it a wake of all this disturbed air. Air that comes off the foil and goes into giant spirals and changes direction and goes like sideways instead of straight back. And it creates this whole area behind the sailboat of this disturbed air. So if you sail in this area, you're going to take less energy out of that wind and you're not going to be able to go as fast. Now, basically, I'm going to give you a perfect one to write down because this is one of the biggest things you need in college sailing. If you're sailing in dirty air, your immediate reaction is, how do I get out of it? Because the longer you stay sailing behind a boat right here in dirty air, you're just not going to go as fast. Here's the first diagram. Love that handwriting. Five knots of wind, 5 to 10 boat lengths behind you. And what you need to notice is when the wind comes straight down like this, and you're sailing upwind, it extends to windward like this. There's a whole area, 5 to 10 boat lengths behind a boat in light air that's disturbed air from the sails. Okay, notice it's starting to get a little smaller. More wind, less dirty air. Now it's about 4 boat lengths. Now heavier, whole different ballgame. Let's say 20 knots. Wind coming out of there. Your dirty air zone is only really going to be about here. 3 max. So you just have to remember. Now the biggest thing people forget is that, especially in light air, if you're sailing right here, you will be in bad air. In light air especially, the wind kind of extends off to the side of the boat. And that's because if we blow it up, when we look at a sail, how it's curved like that, when the wind enters the sail right here, it gets kind of thrown to windward. If here's the center line of the boat, the wind comes in the sail and gets thrown this way. So it creates that whole area over here, where if you try to sail on the hip of another boat, it's called getting lee bowed. Side note, getting lee bowed. Now, if you're a smart sailor and there's a boat sailing along right here, you can come up next to them, tack with the back of your boat right next to their bow, and well, you wouldn't tack on this. We'll get to rules eventually. If you plant your boat right here, you can give this boat dirty air and send it behind you. And it's a really good trick. But to do moves like that, you have to have boat handling. So we'll get to that, kids. How do I turn the projector on?
The second button on the top on that.
Which one?
That one. Dave thumbs on.
All right, here's your last chance. Take a look at this. Close hauled, close reach, reach, broad reach, running.
Is this going to be on the quiz?
It's going to be on the quiz.
Oh, okay. Is it open notes quiz?
No, not even kind of.
Cool.
Does anyone need more time to write this down?
I think we need a random name generator to
Really?
pick some.
You guys good? Okay, last picture I got for you guys. Hey. This is the Volvo 70s. They raced around the world, and this is down by Africa where they in the fog you can see how much they affect the wind behind them. And these trails were going back 5 miles of disturbed air, and that's just because that's how powerful a sail is. It takes energy out of the system. So, cool side note.
Well done, Will. Pretty easy.
Thanks.